So friends, for today's video, I thought it'd be fun to do a tier ranking for all the episodes from the original Avatar: The Last Airbender's first season. And if you are new to this channel, or if you find this video quite a while after, this isn't a rewatch for me. I don't have nostalgia for this series. This is actually my first time watching through it. So it's very possible that once I get through the entirety of the show, this tier ranking would change, because maybe there's certain things that are foreshadowing that I wouldn't even know to look for until after the fact. But this is just after watching one season, my feelings toward each of the individual episodes. I have started an Avatar playlist, so if you'd like a refresher of the episodes, you can watch through my batch reviews for 5 episodes at a time and get my reactions per episode, and I go a little more in depth there. But here we're just going to be ranking the episodes. If you need a refresher as to what the episodes are called, I'll run through them first and then we'll start the tier ranking. So going in order of the episodes, we have The Boy in the Iceberg, The Avatar Returns, The Southern Air Temple, The Warriors of Kyoshi, The King of Omashu, Imprisoned, Winter Solstice Part 1, Winter Solstice Part 2, The Water Bending Scroll, Jet, ugh, hate that guy, The Great Divide, The Storm, The Blue Spirit, The Fortune Teller, Bato of the Water Tribe, The Deserter, The Northern Air Temple, The Water Bending Master, The Siege of the North Part 1, and The Siege of the North Part 2. And I wanted to give myself a little bit of an extra challenge. I do think that there are primarily really great episodes across the board in this show. I don't think there's necessarily a lot of episodes that are awful, and maybe there's a couple that stand out as not being as good as the rest, but when I was going through these and ranking them, because I do like to rank them beforehand instead of ranking them while doing this, you could almost say live, because I don't want to waste your time, because I'm really indecisive and I overthink everything. So when I was going through and trying to decide, I had a couple that I'm like, okay, those ones are the weaker ones. But then after that, I was like, the rest are all at least the middle tier, right? And so I, to challenge myself, have to put at least 3 episodes in each category. So there's a few that I'm like, oh, maybe I would have put them a little bit higher, or maybe I don't really feel that differently about this episode than one in the tier above it, but I gotta meet those requirements. Interestingly, I actually think the same can be said of the really exceptional episodes. I enjoyed this first season for the most part, almost every episode. There was just a couple I didn't love, but there's also a couple of episodes that really stand out as not just good, but exceptional, a masterclass in storytelling and writing and character development. And those ones, it was hard for me to think about what other episodes were that good, because I'm like, well, those almost belong in their own tier. And I had to kind of decide what was maybe just as good as those. And I'm wondering if you're a big fan of the series, if you already kind of know which ones are probably going to go where. It's the middle ones that I think were the hardest to decide on. And I like to start in the middle tier and then work my way to the extremes. So we'll go ahead and start with the middle tier. I only have 3 things in this tier. And I was like, okay, most of them belong in the second tier. So the 3 that I have in the middle tier, one of them would be the Water Bending Scroll. This is the episode where Katara has, I would say, character flaws shown, where Aang is catching on to water bending faster than her based off of this scroll that they have found and taken from some pirates, and she's getting very agitated, very irritated, and she's really hard on herself, to a point though where it bleeds into her friendship with Aang. And I actually really like seeing those moments in characters, because it makes them feel more real, and it makes them feel like they're not just these perfect cookie cutter characters, that they have their pros and their cons, as all humans do. So I actually really enjoyed the episode for that. And I also really like that you get this sort of silly showdown with the pirates, Zuko, Aang, and all of them. I really enjoyed all of that, but when I think about maybe more of the emotional impact of this episode, I would say there isn't as much for me. And for that reason, that's why it's sort of in the middle. It didn't really make me feel really sad or really excited. It wasn't the funniest of the funny episodes. So I think it's one of the few that's just like, okay, that was a nice episode. Not the best, but certainly not the worst. I also have Winter Solstice Part 1. Winter Solstice as a whole, I feel like was really great when you combine the two and you think of them as a whole. But because it is part of a section, this was sort of setting up for the bigger, more impactful moments. I think that the Winter Solstice Part 2 was very good, and so it makes sense that we would need time to get to those more emotionally impactful moments. But even just the introduction of the spirits and those sorts of things at first just kind of felt like it was not out of nowhere necessarily, but we hadn't really seen too much of this before or gotten hints of it. So there was sort of an adjustment period for that first episode. Winter Solstice Part 2 I thought was very good, but this first part of it, I think it was a little bit more setup, which makes sense. It's sort of an inevitability when it comes to episodes that are Part 1 and Part 2. So that one's here. By the way, my dog is really close by, so if you hear silly grunting and stuff, she's like rubbing her head on the carpet. So if you hear any of that noise, it's possible you didn't hear any of it, and I said all of that for nothing. And then we have Imprisoned. This is the only other one that's in this middle tier. And when I watched this episode, I commented on the fact that I actually thought this one could have been broken up into 2 parts and that it could have gone for longer. We could have dove a little bit deeper into it because I was compelled by these earthbenders who are being taken by the Fire Nation. I felt for them right away, but I do feel like there's a little bit of pacing issues where we sort of rushed this. And this was a big moment for Katara because she often stands up for what she believes in. She stands up for other people. And I liked, as morbid as it sounds, that she sort of failed at first and then had to persevere and try again. She was willing to do that, and she was willing to put herself in harm's way to help other people. And I liked the messaging of this so much. I just wish it had been either more than 1 episode, or if we had found a way to maybe cut some of the fluff even within the episode. When I think back on it, I'm like, I thought it was really good, but I think that's my one criticism of it, is I actually think it could have been longer. I think if I don't think Winter Solstice, I was going to say maybe, here's what it comes down to. The episodes that are in the lower tiers, cut one of them, make this a 2-parter, and then it probably would have gone up for me. Anyway, now getting into Tier 4 and Tier 2. There are so many more episodes in Tier 2 than in Tier 4. So I'm going to start with Tier 2. Let's do 3 at a time for now. So the Southern Air Temple. It was really difficult for me to decide if this was top tier or second tier. And I went ahead and put it in this spot just because there was an episode that I'm like, I think I had more emotional investment in something else. So Southern Air Temple is in the second tier. However, I feel like as far as introductory episodes go, because this is really early on in the season, it's only the 3rd episode, it really hit. I remember thinking, are we going to get, because I've never watched the show before, I was like, it's actually really sad that this kid has been trapped for as long as he has. Surely everything he's known is gone. He's going to feel that at some point, right? We're going to confront that. And then when we did, and pretty early on, it was really devastating. But then you also get a sneak peek of God mode Aang, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm here for this. And it was also really emotionally gutting. So I just think that the Southern Air Temple, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, is it top tier? I'm not going to overthink it. We'll keep it in this tier. But I thought that was a great episode, especially early on, to have that strong of an episode. Very good. I talked about Winter Solstice Part 1. Winter Solstice Part 2 is in this second tier. I already kind of commented on the fact that I thought it was great. I just thought the first episode was sort of introducing us to all this, but I really appreciated how much Sokka was trying to help Aang, be there for Aang, not let Aang go through this alone. I mentioned that we made the timeline a lot shorter as far as how much time we have for Aang to master the various elements and bending, and so that really raised the stakes, and also just the sort of environmental themes in these episodes I thought were really, really great. We're introduced to the spirit world, and we're now understanding it a little bit better. So, and just in general, I thought that one was, I thought it was very good. And then the fortune teller. So among the funny episodes, this one was one of my favorites because it was just so ridiculous. They really leaned into the fun of this one. Aang, I just can't get over his slumping around. I thought it was super funny. And so this one maybe belonged in the 3rd tier because it's not as emotionally impactful. And it doesn't have the really, well, it did have a really cool moment, because when they realize, oh no, the lava, the trenches basically that we dug aren't going to be enough, and Aang just uses his airbending and is awesome, I was like, Aang's so cool. I think I said that out loud while watching it. Plus, it was really funny. So I really appreciate it for all of that. There was a lack of Zuko. Maybe if Zuko had been in this would have been top tier. I don't know. I miss, when Zuko's not an episode, I miss it. Oh, by the way, not that, I don't feel like anybody cares that much, but another addition to why the first part of the Winter Solstice Part 1 is in the middle tier is because I thought the whole Iroh getting captured plot line was not that good or that strong, because how he chooses to leave tracks and things felt impractical. He could have, like, at one point he falls off the animal and then, like, his shoe gets left behind. I'm like, you could have just kicked your shoe off. Well, you didn't have to make this spectacle. Wouldn't it have made it less obvious if it had just happened to fall off your foot? Anyway, nobody cares though, I'm sure. Now going down to the fourth tier, we're going to alternate between 2 and 4. I have Jet. Gonna be honest, the world building in this episode was really, really cool. I like that Sokka got to have a moment, some character growth in this episode. He really stood up for what he believed in. He had to use his practical thinking to help people, but Jet is just so annoying. And I would say also there's, once again, a lack of Zuko and Iroh in this episode, and Katara and Aang sort of almost took a back seat. They were very swayed by Jet's charisma, and I feel like the show maybe hit a little extra hard that Jet was a D-bag, so I'm like, why can't they see it? Which I understand. The whole thing is that you get swept away in this person's charisma, and Sokka really had to push back against that. I get it, but I also, I just hated that guy. That's really all it comes to. I just couldn't stand that character. And I actually feel like we could have done a lot with them, and this question of, okay, but the cost of resistance, what does it actually entail when you have to make these harder decisions? I actually feel like you could have a more, not mature, like this is immature, I don't mean it that way, but I mean maybe more, if this was T for teen, you could say, or PG, that if you had something that was a little bit more adult leaning, you could have a whole show centered around a character like Jet. But for the most part, though, I was like, yeah, he's just annoying. I just don't, am I the only one that hates this guy? I can't, I feel like I can't be. I mean, it's one of those things where you're like, Zuko isn't great, but he is. But he's so well done that you care about him. So he's a really great example of in this first season, a villain, because I predict he's not going to stay one, but a villain done well, a villain that you care for, that you weirdly root for, that you weirdly want them, and they're the person they're going head to head against, you want them to be allies, and it's done so well. So then when you see characters like Jet, where you're like, ugh, this guy, the fact that Jet is technically on the same side as our heroes and I hate him, I do appreciate that, but I've already said I hate this guy. And then now going back up to the second tier, we have Batu of the Water Tribe, or Batu, I'm forgetting how they pronounced it. But this episode, I thought, really showcases Aang's loneliness, his desire to hold on to his friends no matter what, because they're all he has. And that made me really sad. We get more to do with Katara and Sokka's culture. We get to see a little bit more into Sokka's, the fact that he struggles with being able to grow into a man. He's right on the brink of, going from childhood to adulthood right when everything happens, and he loses the adult figures in his life that he looked up to, and so he's kind of he doesn't know what to do, and he doesn't have those models. And so I like that he got to sort of have a little bit more of the tradition that he missed out on. And then I also just really liked the showdown, the monster fight, you could say, with Appa, where I was like, yeah, Appa. And then Iroh was funny, Zuko. The whole episode just had a lot of really great things. This is another one that I considered putting in top tier. I mentioned at the beginning that I had to have at least 3 in each category, but an additional challenge I made for myself is that I could only have 3 in the top. So if you're wondering, like, why didn't you just put Southern Air Temple at the top, or why didn't you just put this one at the top? I really wanted the top ones to be my absolute standouts. And also I just like the challenge of trying to narrow it down. I also have The Boy in the Iceberg as a second tier, because when it comes to a first episode, I was immediately gripped, entertained, I cared, I was invested in this world, I was invested in these characters. They already had so much character to them that I was really interested, and I think that it's a phenomenal first episode of a show. A lot of times first episodes, for me, I figure I'm not going to care that much and I have to power through. I cared immediately. Plus, this is back when episodes for shows were about 20 minutes long, so the fact that they were able to do all of that in about 20 minutes, I thought was fantastic. The Avatar returns, so just kind of piggybacking off of what I just said about the first episode, I think for introductory episodes, these two were great. The season starts super phenomenally, in my opinion, because I thought The Boy in the Iceberg was great as an introduction. I thought the second episode expanded on that, gets you a little bit more acclimated to the world, and then the third episode, being the Southern Air Temple, hits you with the emotions. Those first three episodes were fantastic. Back to the fourth tier, we have the Water-Bending Master. So I commented on this while doing my more in-depth batch reviews, but the Water-Bending Master just relied... It forced Katara to show her character through sexism for not the first time, because she's already kind of having to push back against her brother. I feel like we've already used sexism in the show, which is realistic. I'm not criticizing the fact that it's present. I appreciate that it's present, especially because if you're looking at a show that is, you know, aimed for a younger audience, and of course adults and people who are outside the demographic can still enjoy it. But if you're looking at your target audience being young people, these are things they're going to have to experience and deal with. So I appreciate it being included. I just didn't love that they kind of included it more than once. And in this episode, it felt a little bit lazier. I feel like the way they navigated it with Sokka was very maturely done and done really, really well. Whereas, and I don't mean Kyoshi Island, I just mean the way that Sokka internalizes what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a man, and all of these things, and he doesn't quite get it right, and you understand why because of his circumstances, stuff I was talking about earlier. But anyway, in this episode, it was just like, this guy just doesn't teach girls because that's how they've always done it. And you're like, okay, that's not quite a good enough reason for me. Katara did have some cool moments, but I just thought it wasn't the strongest use of that. So for that reason, this episode is a little bit lower. We have one more here, and I'm just going to go ahead and say the one here, The Deserter. This episode, I think the placement of it just made it difficult because I was so ready to get to those last chunk of episodes. So The Deserter, I was kind of like, okay, but can we get to the North Pole? Can we get to the big moments? Can Zuko come in and stuff? And Zhao was so dumb in this episode that I was like, all right, I like that Aang outsmarted him, but can we not have Zhao be a complete idiot in order to show Aang's intelligence here? I was kind of feeling like it just felt like the one episode to go between some good episodes, because Bato of the Water Tribe was really good. This came after. Like I said, I just feel like it was a placement thing. We're coming off the high of some really good episodes that were coming before, and it just sort of highlighted that it wasn't quite as good. But I wonder if it had occurred earlier in the season, if I would have enjoyed it a little bit more. I think it's just not as strong as some of the other things toward the latter half of the show. Back to tier 2, and then we'll get to the top and bottom tiers. So the Warriors of Kyoshi, I already kind of touched on that. I feel like how they navigated Sokka and his sexism was done really well. I liked that you had these characters that kind of put him in his place, and they did it in a sort of silly but upfront way. I liked that quite a bit. I really enjoyed the humor in this one with Aang, everybody being infatuated with him on this island, and I thought that was really funny. The painting thing was great. If you don't remember, somebody's painting Aang, and then they look up, and suddenly there's other people around Aang, and then they go to draw, and they look up, and there's more people, and it just keeps happening until there's basically the whole village. We saw good character development with Aang as far as he was getting wrapped up in all of that, and then he was sort of neglecting his friendship with Katara. He wasn't listening to her when she was giving sound advice and was being wise about the fact that they should leave because Zuko's after them. And so in general, I feel that it was... I mean, also it came after the Southern Air Temple. Man, those first 5 episodes... Well, the first 4... fifth one wasn't as good. But those first 4 episodes were all so good. So in general, I just thought that was great. And then the Northern Air Temple. I just think the world building in the show across the board and how they do architecture and how they show each of the various different bending abilities, how they use those throughout their cities, I think is awesome. The way that they show it in the Northern Air Temple specifically, though, I just thought was really, really cool. I did criticize this episode a little bit for the fact that I think it could have been a lot harder hitting had they actually not managed to push back against the Fire Nation. And I said when I did my batch reviews, I don't need a bunch of people to die, but I feel like it would have really shown the difficulties of resisting the Fire Nation had they not just decided as soon as we're going to fight back, we win. I think if it had cost them something, maybe it cost them some ground or they had to flee or something, I think that could have hit a little bit harder. However, I still thought it was a really cool episode. I thought the airbending, it's not airbending, but the way that they've utilized technology to match airbending was really cool. Just in general, I had a good time with this episode. I thought it was cool, and I thought the fight was really cool as well. Now to the extremes. I'm going to start with the bottom tier, and I don't think this is going to be a surprise because when I was replying to a lot of you mentioned that The Great Divide is known for being one of the weakest episodes, and a lot of you skip it on rewatch. The Great Divide, it was cliche, it felt like a filler episode, it was silly. The best part really was just at the end when you realize Aang just made up this story. I thought that was funny, but otherwise it just wasn't as strong as a lot of the rest of it. And then for me, the King of Omashu, I don't know what it is, but it kind of annoys me. I didn't think the episode was as good. It lasted too long. It was goofy. I feel like the king wastes their time, and then in turn, I feel like my time is being wasted. I just don't like... Maybe other people are like, I love him, he's so silly and goofy. I don't love him. Although the earthbending city itself is really cool, and their mail, I guess you could say, their mail system seems like a lot of fun, honestly. I would also want to ride those. I think it looks cool. I'm going to save my thoughts for the last one that's in this category for the end and go up to the top tier. And I am sure I'm not alone. Everybody has to agree that the Storm and the Blue Spirit are both top tier, right? Am I alone? Is there anybody that hates these episodes? Feel free to say if you do. I'm not going to be like, you're stupid or something, but oh my gosh, are these episodes so good? The Storm, the parallels between not only Aang, his present and his past, but then everything with him and then Zuko and Zuko's past is so good. You see glimpses of both of these inner struggles for both of these characters throughout the show, and then to really see it in this way was so well done. And just in general, I feel like the symbolism in this episode, the colors that they use, all of it was fantastic, was so good. Don't know I have too much else to say. And then the Blue Spirit's so cool, and it's like, oh, this is what could happen if these two banded together. And the fight scene was really cool. Oh, and Aang, both of these episodes, so fantastic. Aang, though, when he's sad because they ask him, like, did you make any new friends? Or they say something along those lines. He's like, I thought I did, but no, or something like that. And I'm like, no. Can Zuko and Aang just be friends already? Can Zuko... they could be so cool as allies. I have said before, and nobody can spoil me, but if Zuko or Aang dies, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I love both these characters so much. I like a lot of our characters. I like Sokka, I like Katara. Man, the main characters of the show are all so good. They're all so good. So anyway, those 2 episodes, top tier. Now, I feel like what I decided for the last of the top tier episodes and the last of the bottom tier episodes is cheating. But whatever. So I have the Siege of the North Part 1 at the bottom, but then the Siege of the North Part 2 at the top. I don't actually think that Part 1 was bottom tier and Part 2 was top tier. For me, it's that the great moments across these 2 episodes were so good and so... It's just such a culmination of everything we've been working toward. You finally see Fire Nation and basically Aang in the Avatar state, in God mode, I called it. You see them go head to head, and it's everything we've been waiting for this whole season. It was great in those ways. You see the way Zuko strayed from them and then gets Aang, and then once again you're like, oh, we're so close to these two. Just can't they just be allies? So for all those reasons, I feel like I had to at least acknowledge that those moments were top tier. However, I don't like the Princess Yue plotline. I thought it was too sudden. I thought it didn't get worked into the show well enough. It could have had a lot of really devastating moments around it, and as a result of it being kind of rushed, it did not. So I feel like the weaker points of those last 2 episodes, they were, in my opinion, they were kind of some of the weaker things about the show. And then the great parts, though, were some of the greatest things about the show. So I know that's not fair. I probably should have actually decided where those individual episodes belonged, but I had to highlight the good parts of those last episodes because the good parts were so good. So that's it for a tier ranking of season 1 of the original Avatar, The Last Airbender. I'd love to know, where did you agree? Where did you disagree? Do you feel like you could even do this, or would you be way too indecisive? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I continue to just have the best time watching this show, getting to talk to all of you about this show, getting to see your thoughts on this show. My friends that, like a lot of people have watched the show before, I think are... I mean, they're not spoiling me, which is great, but it's really fun to get to talk to them about it now. So just in general, this has been such a great experience, and thank you to all of you for that, because you're very much part of the reason of that. But anyway, I have my Avatar playlist linked down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.